Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Implementing a Hybrid Cloud Solution in Government, sponsored by VMware on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today, Howard Spera, the Chief Information Officer at the Export-Import Bank of the United States, Ben Bergersen, the CIO of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and Bill Rowan, the Vice President of Federal Sales for VMware. At the end of last segment, we were talking a little bit about maybe why it's maybe a little easier to move to the cloud to do IT modernization. And Howard brought up an interesting point about some of the other challenges, like when you go find a lawyer, the lawyer may not have an IT background, or a financial analyst that may not necessarily understand IT. I want to bring Ben into the conversation. What challenges do you face or have you faced in the past because being a small agency and then wanting to kind of either be agile and move quickly toward a modernized IT environment?
There's a couple challenges that we find in the U.S. Trade and Development Agency that have been encountered in many other agencies. One is the skill set. You're transforming the workforce from doing infrastructure to then virtualization and clustering and containers to you're now a cloud service engineer. You need to understand everything, but you're not actually doing it. You have to talk to someone else and convince them that their services need to be tweaked in a certain manner. That's a very different skill set, and we end up doing workforce training to give those new skills to our existing staff, our federal personnel, as well as our contractors. The next issue that we have with the challenge is the culture. Everyone wants to have a more nimble agency and be more mission focused and spend less money on IT. But they're comfortable with their printer down the hall or their network share, and they know the servers down the hall. And it isn't until while we were moving and our old equipment in the old building was dying and an air conditioner would go out, it was 12 years old, and do we buy a new air conditioner when we're just gonna move in a month or two and say, it's okay. It's cached on your tablet and on your laptop and on your PC. So even if the data center has got heating problems, your data isn't just there. And then people start to realize, oh wow, it's on my smartphone, it's on my laptop, and I don't have to have the server down the hall. That executive then talks to their friend who talks to their friend, and the biggest thing that we got was executives teaching each other how to use the cloud services, because IT isn't going to push a new service. It's got to grow from the customer base and from the leadership. And that's how we got success.
One thing when we talk about training the workforce is, and I think this gets a mixed review, is a lot of agencies don't have training budgets, or they cut their training budgets, or when it comes to when you budget, when the CIO put your budget together, somebody comes and goes, well, can you reduce that line? Did you have that problem in terms of the training budget, or were you able to kind of explain to your bosses, hey, this is a must. If we're going to do this to get us more nimble and agile and save money, we still need to do this?
We have a training budget for our full-time staff, and there's also training built into all our contracts. And you're right, it's constantly defending those 2 points and making sure that no one poaches those and reuses it for other things. So we have the money there, and it's just showing here's the impact of this group not having the skills, and now they need to have these skills, and here's the impact. If you can make it a concrete example, then you can successfully even grow your training budget, but you need examples.
Howard, did you also have this similar challenge with the workforce, with the skill set retraining, or were you more heavily contractor and you just brought in more contractors?
Sure, well, I think a lot of small agencies are pretty heavy contractors, so our ratio is actually probably considered low, but it's still I'll call it between 2 and 3 contract staff for every Fed. But again, small agencies, our total Fed headcount is 30, and we've got about 60 contractors. So in terms of trying to move the needle, these are still relatively small numbers. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned training. Our experience is we didn't have much of a problem with respect to our IT staff. Many of them are running cloud stuff at home on their own, right? So getting the agency to kind of move in that direction was pretty straightforward. What I would say is, I thought it was great that Ben picked this up, is the, I'll call it the end user community, sort of the non-IT community. The key thing when you look at our mission is, we have commercial bankers, right, and deal professionals. And those are typically, that's why they get paid. And that's very focused, I'll call it, on writing and executing in Word and interacting with other bankers and other lawyers. So from a certain perspective, being on a desktop with a locally loaded version of Office 365 is very comfortable, and they can perform very effectively. And so when we want to change that environment, when we want to change that ecosystem, that's where we have to be really careful, because the key productivity is in that staff. And so one of the things we're really focusing on in our sort of next round of modernization, which is sort of the push to this year we're on schedule to complete Office 2016 and Windows 10, and this is the part that we're working very hard on ensuring that we have a training and sort of adoption program, so that we don't degrade the agency's core competency that we're paid to perform on behalf of the taxpayers.
Bill, jump in.
Yeah, I think that both of them bring up strong points. And from the vendor community, one of the big pushes we've seen for small, medium, and large agencies is ensuring when they are doing agreements that there's been a built-in schedule for training. We were, interestingly enough, before we were taping today, Howard and I were talking out in the hallway about, how do you align your period of performance on some of your support contracts at different points of the year, so you spread things out a little bit, make them a little more simplistic. Training is the exact same way. As new advents of new services become available, especially for those clients of ours that are operating in some sort of hybrid environment, it's great to train everybody today, but what does that workforce look like in 2 years? Have there been new people that may not be as familiar? And as long as there's a continual process of being able to bring training in, being able to take advantage of new services that might be offered, and how is that incorporated then into the curriculum, I think becomes the key. And it's through that process that when we start to look at the functional organizations, those bankers in Howard's example, or in Ben's organization, those functional folks can then give feedback back to the IT organization about things they would like to see, changes that could make them even more efficient, more agile, more productive, however the definitions that you want to use. But it's a constant piece of continuing to learn. I've never taken a class on Office 365, but when you work with it enough, you start to go, hey, it'd be really interesting if I could do this, this, and this, and you get to build those processes back in.
How often are you seeing that training piece in contracts? I mean, is it being specifically called out, or is it more of the training as necessary as is required?
Well, interestingly, if we are asked by a client to kind of scope out what is it going to take to be able to make this move into, whether it's one of the hybrid environments, whether they're using Amazon or Microsoft, IBM, Google, Oracle, whoever the player is, if they're coming and asking us, it'll be a part of what we tell them should be a part of the plan. Now, sometimes, respectfully, a contract will come out that after the users have decided what they think would be best, contracts may let an RFP or an RFQ out that may drop some of those pieces because they don't necessarily see them as being relevant to the service being performed or being requested. We'll answer the mail as they've asked us to answer, but also always throw back some options of here's some things that you might want to consider, and or if they don't assume them at that point in time, go back to them at a later date and say, listen, I know you're in the middle of the process, but you need to think about what this looks like in a year or 2 years, and how do those services become just as valuable to you then, actually maybe more valuable to you then than they actually are today.
I want to shift over to cybersecurity. I think, Bill, you brought up an interesting point when it comes to the cloud services or the IT modernization services, is that things change, it's different people that come in, and we know that through just our natural experience, cybersecurity is continually evolving, the threat is always increasing. So maybe let me start with Ben on the end there. When you talk about a small agency and you talk about cybersecurity moving to the cloud, How do you see, does it less complex, more complex? Where does cybersecurity fit into this discussion?
Cloud cybersecurity over the past several years has matured, so it has actually helped us with our internal infrastructure. Bill talked about taking some ideas from cloud services and bringing them into your internal IT services. We've taken the GSA FedRAMP cybersecurity program and all the requirements and the templates and adopted them for in-house use. There's no need to reinvent the wheel on how you should do things, even down to the notes on the sidebar saying, hint, here's a document that you need to write, here's a document that you need your service provider to do, and here's how you audit it. You go, this is a guidebook on how to do it for people who have been living through it for the past 10 years. So cybersecurity is integrated into every cloud service that we buy or that we compete out on contract, just as training our workforce is. And we've got highlighted requirements, and that's basically what GSA and NIST are saying is you've got 384 requirements. Pick 5 or 10 that you really care about and say you must be FedRAMP authorized and meet these things. That way you can get the things that are very important to you and you can map them to your high value assets. So cybersecurity is integrated and it's a lot more mature.
Do you get a sense because through cloud though you're better at cybersecurity because you're moving to either a virtualized environment or to a full-on cloud environment, that what you had in your data center now was never as good as it you have in the cloud, or is it equal? I mean, or is it too early?
We have a robust baseline that we get reassurance from in the cloud. We know what we're getting if you get the low, the moderate, or the high. For our environment, we exceed some of the requirements of that baseline because we decide we want higher availability because we're a more mobile workforce. So in some areas, we are higher than the cloud environment, but we pay more for that. We invest in that. And the other areas, we're the same. But we've also done a large transformation in the last 3 years at the agency, and that has a big effect on it as well. So time has made us better, and the cloud has made us better.
Howard, talk a little bit as well about cybersecurity as you see it. Is the Export-Import Bank getting better cybersecurity because of the cloud? Is it about the same? And is there a different set of complexities because as a small agency you're moving to the cloud, or does it make just life easy?
Yeah. Well, I look at it at a couple of different ways. So I don't know if it's making it easier. I think it
maybe easier is not the best word, right?
Yeah.
It's not ever easy.
What I would say is this. You know, my initial impression is simply, if you will, my attack surface or the different parties that are now potentially involved in my cybersecurity from a supply chain perspective has exploded, and that's probably no different than any individual in their private capacity on a routine basis getting a note saying, hi, we'd like to get you another 1 year of identity protection. So that's kind of one piece. At the other time, there's a realistic understanding of, notwithstanding that I've expanded the attack surface, that if I'm working with reputable vendors with great reputations, there are certain things that they probably can do much better than I can ever do. The other angle is a little bit of threat intelligence. When we look at threat intelligence, aren't a particularly interesting agency. So we were probably never a particularly interesting target from a, I'll call it a hostile actor. But I certainly know Amazon is an important target. Microsoft is an important target. So I don't know, how you balance those things out at the end. I would say as a practical matter, though, we could not run the services that we need to provide in-house. It's just not possible these days when you think about the talent that you would have to retain, the infrastructure that you have to build, and the budget that you have. And so, history will tell us, I guess, how that's all going to work out. I think, though, more pragmatically and more sort of, I'll call it, in my face today is sort of understanding the seams between all the different providers is something that we focus on, and making sure that just because we put it out in the cloud that we don't have a robust internal discussion and an understanding of, even though it's in the cloud, there's still a data somewhere and there's still pipe somewhere, and making sure that we understand that and sort of how we handle our ATO and IV&V process. And we found that the skills in that area have really had to shift, because more and more the workload in security is actually review of third-party type of activity. And then the last piece that I would say that we're still working through is sort of the SIM piece of this, is then how do you get situational awareness around all of these platforms? And some of these platforms, fortunately, the bigger parts of our portfolio are readily able to integrate into some kind of SIM capability. So at least, but we've got little pieces that our ability to kind of get a total picture of the enterprise are a little bit more challenged.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. I know, Bill, you want to jump in, so when we come back, that's how we'll start us off. You're listening to the panel discussion, Implementing a Hybrid Cloud Solution in Government, sponsored by VMware on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.